Most of the press, including the commentators such as yours truly and really everyone else that produces content, tends to be focused on the negative. While the cathedral media tends to be this way because that's how they sell the papers, the rest of us have various reasons and rationalizations for why we focus disproportionately or sometimes entirely on the negative. So to counter this trend, at least from time to time, I say we should look at the positive news that occurred lately. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, I make no promises that this series will be long or often published, but I do think we should look at the positive news at least from time to time. So as a result, this is my first attempt to practice what I preach in an organized way. So, with that said, let's dive in. The first piece of good news is the Czech Republic elections, of course. And we'll read a bit from The Guardian. It doesn't really matter where you take your news from. The entirety of the cathedral is mortified by the result. Anti-establishment billionaire Andrej Babiš is to be named Czech Prime Minister, titles The Guardian. Quote, "One of Central Europe's richest men will begin the tricky task of building a ruling coalition after convincing Czech voters in weekend elections that he can stem immigration, fight corruption and banish the establishment from power." Andrej Babiš, a tycoon-turned-populist politician who has been compared to Donald Trump and Silvio Berlusconi, confirmed on Monday that the Czech president would ask him next week to begin forming the next government. Babiš led his new party, ANO, which is yes in Czech, to a resounding poll victory, winning almost 30% of the vote. The election ended a quarter of a century of political dominance by the traditional parties of the Czech mainstream, with the Social and Christian Democrats scoring just 7% and 6% respectively. Voters largely turned their backs on liberal pro-European parties, with the center-right Civic Democrats winning 11% of the vote, the direct democracy advocates of the Pirate Party 10.6%, and the far-right anti-EU SPD 10.8%. "We'll do our utmost to persuade any other party to join us," Babiš said on Monday. Both the mainstream center-right and center-left parties, however, have already ruled themselves out of any coalition, and not just because his abrasive style and confrontational policies have alienated many of their leading members. Many are reluctant to ally themselves with a self-styled anti-corruption campaigner who is himself mired in allegations of fraud. There are also questions about whether Babiš would enjoy immunity from prosecution if he were able to form a government. Babiš is a bundle of contradictions, a self-proclaimed anti-establishment figure who is a former finance minister, billionaire and media mogul, and an anti-corruption campaigner who this month was charged with a €2 million fraud. Babiš denies any wrongdoing and has dismissed the case as politically motivated. What is clear is that Babiš has struck a powerful chord with many Czech voters, particularly in rural areas where people warm to his skepticism about the power of Brussels and his no-nonsense style. Many were also impressed by his determination when finance ministers to get to grips with the national debt, crack down on tax evaders and kickstart much-needed infrastructure projects. Unusually for such a populist politician, his victory comes not at a time of economic downturn in the Czech economy, but at a moment when the country of 10.6 million people is enjoying strong growth, robust wage increases, and low levels of unemployment. In recent years, many Czechs have been far from confident in their country's economic stability, however, and have come to resent immigration and what they see as cronyism in government and the legal system. Babiš, who is estimated by Forbes to have a net worth of $4 billion, founded the Action for Dissatisfied Citizens, or the ANO, in 2012, saying it was opposed to immigration and committed to eradicating systemic corruption in Czech public life. He seems to regard the party as being inseparable from himself, telling one interviewer, quote, "The party is connected to my person. The party is me." Close quote. And then the article goes on and on to list the party's sources of funding and also list every single innuendo and unproven gossip ever told by anyone anywhere about Babiš, both in Czechia and Slovakia and everywhere else. Anyway, the point is that this guy puts the fear of the devil in every single establishmentarian cuckold, both inside Czechia and abroad, and this is lovely to watch. Even funnier is the press's rush to call the SPD as far-right. The New York Times, a former newspaper, even called the Czech SPD white supremacist and xenophobic and racist. The SPD in Czechia is not the Social Democratic Party like in Germany. The SPD in Czechia is the Party for Liberty and Direct Democracy, led by a chap named Tomio Okamura, a chap born in Tokyo and of mixed Czech, Japanese and Korean heritage. Yeah, that's the chap the New York Times and the rest of the leftist media complex wants you to believe is the face of white nationalism in Central Europe. Lovely, lovely indeed. And also Babiš, this guy, he basically funded his own campaign, and now they're accusing him, oh my god, that corporation that he controls funded his campaign. Yeah, he funded his campaign with his own money. What's the problem with that? Anyway, our second piece of news is also Czech related. Coming from Breitbart, Czech Republic Parliament passes constitutional right to bear arms. And it goes like this, quote, Czech lawmakers have passed legislation in the lower parliament that would see the right to bear firearms enshrined in the country's constitution in a move directed against tighter regulations from the European Union. The legislation was passed with 139 deputies agreeing to the amendment to the constitution, with only 9 deputies voting against. The amendment will now be considered by the Czech Senate, where it will require a supermajority of 3/5 of the members in order to pass into law, Die Presse reports. Similar to the US Second Amendment to the Constitution, which gives Americans the right to keep and bear arms, the Czech legislation reads, quote, citizens of the Czech Republic have the right to acquire, retain and bear arms and ammunition. The amendment also notes that the right is there to ensure the safety of the country, similar to the provision of the well-regulated militia in the American Amendment. Whilst the new law will enshrine the right for Czech citizens to purchase and own firearms, members of the public will still need to acquire a weapons certificate. Interior Minister Milan Chovanec said the new legislation was directly aimed at the EU directive from March, which sought to prohibit semi-automatic firearms and magazines that hold more than 10 rounds for pistols and 20 rounds for longer guns. We do not want to disarm our own people at a time when the security situation is constantly worsening, Chovanec said. The Czech Republic has one of the largest rates of firearm ownership in the European Union, with an estimated 300,000 gun owners who own around 800,000 individual firearms. Laws around gun ownership in the Central European country are also far less restrictive than other EU countries, with 240,000 of the 300,000 gun owners having concealed carry permits and self-defense being a recognized reason for firearms ownership. The Czech defiance of EU policy has in recent months been largely confined to the issue of redistribution of migrants. Czech leaders, along those from other Visegrad Group states of Hungary, Poland and Slovakia, have all rejected EU plans to redistribute migrants from Italy and Greece, raising concerns over security. Andrej Babiš, expected to become the next Czech Prime Minister, completely rejected mass immigration this week, commenting, quote, we have to fight for what our ancestors built here. If there will be more Muslims than Belgians in Brussels, that's their problem. I don't want that here. They won't be telling us who should live here. Very good stuff. See, it's these kinds of stuff that put a smile on one's face. Now I, of course, hope this will spread all over the Intermarium, because it's something that is very much needed. Now, let's go to Sweden and read from Sveriges Television, a moderate party profile on the #MeToo campaign, slightly disturbed women, titles the SVT. And it goes like this, quote, the moderate from the Blekinge province, Emil Pilthammar, strongly attacks the #MeToo campaign and the media reporting around it. Children starve to death in the world, but you prefer to set the status of #MeToo on social media and then proclaiming how brave you are, she writes among other things. In a blog post, she criticizes the hashtag #MeToo campaign and thinks that those who use the campaign as a rule are easily offended pricks and not at all victims of anything. She writes, among other things, that the campaign is mostly a game for the gallery where casual girls or women, mainly from the far left of the spectrum, are making themselves to be victims. Life is hard for them, close quote. For SVT News Blekinge, she develops her reasoning, quote, I'm absolutely convinced that the vast majority of people who have been subjected to some sort of real sexual offense do indeed scream about it in the square when it happens. It's only the attention seekers who pull these kinds of stunts wanting to be seen as victims, she says. The blog post drew strong criticism from the party mate Ellen Peterson, former chairman of the Youth Blekinge, now a member of the federal government, quote, I'm terribly saddened and disappointed because she thinks everyone using the campaign is easily offended. I also think it's sad when she writes that she would see it as a compliment if someone would give her such a comment or a pat on her butt. I think it's totally sick, says Ellen Peterson. But Emily Pilthammer did not cave in to the criticism, and she added, quote, I did not think the same when I was younger. You know, things change as you grow older. It is easy to say, oh, how terrible this is, me too, me too. Definitely easier than saying that this is an outlandish exaggeration over trivial nonsense. Imagine if these people had been involved in serious disasters or famines, added Emily Pilthammer. Emily Pilthammer also announced that she will be running for the Riksdag from the moderate party in the upcoming election. And if the upcoming election will be as safeguarded as Sweden's borders lately, I will make sure to vote for her. But no, in all seriousness now, it is in itself tremendous progress that now someone running for office in a mainstream party in Sweden is willing to crap on the feminist shaming party and then double down on it when criticized by the usual suspects. That's exactly how you fight these people in the culture, and to see this coming from Sweden, let me be honest, it puts a huge smile on my face. The culture gets better every time someone says no to these bullies. Now, speaking of things getting better, coming from the Foundation for Economic Education, the world's poorest people are getting richer faster than anyone else. Quote, last Tuesday marked the 25th anniversary of the United Nations International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. The date intentionally coincides with the 30th anniversary of the Call to Action, which saw the French anti-poverty campaigner Father Joseph Wresinski ask the international community in front of 100,000 Parisians to strive to eradicate extreme poverty. To mark the occasion, Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, was featured in a short video assessing the current state of world poverty. Despite noting such issues as unemployment, inequality, and conflict continuing in some regions, Guterres correctly observed that since 1990, the world has made, quote, remarkable progress in eradicating poverty, close quote. While it is valuable to acknowledge that problems remain, it is important to reflect on just how far we've come. The speed of poverty alleviation in the last 25 years has been historically unprecedented. Not only is the proportion of people in poverty at a record low, but in spite of adding 2 billion to the planet's population, the overall number of people living in extreme poverty has fallen too. In 1820, 94% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty, less than $1.90 per day adjusted for purchasing power. In 1990, this figure was 34.8%, and in 2015, just 9.6%. In the last quarter of a century, more than 1.25 billion people escaped extreme poverty. That equates to over 138,000 people being lifted out of poverty every day. If it takes you 5 minutes to read this article, another 480 people will have escaped the shackles of extreme poverty by the time you finish. Progress is awesome. In 1820, only 60 million people didn't live in extreme poverty. In 2015, 6.6 billion did not. And this is awesome. I mean, this is the kind of news that rarely gets discussed, not just because such a good news is now banal and mundane, such as, let's put a different analogy, the fact that in most days 100% of passenger airplanes land safely at their destinations, but also because the press has gotten increasingly left-wing. Whereas in the late 1980s you would still see even cesspools like the New York Times explaining why minimum wage policies would in fact create more poverty instead of alleviating it, nowadays almost the entirety of news comes from a militant anti-capitalist bias. Even as free markets continue to make the world a better place, and even as socialism continues to prevent even further and faster progress from being made. This is, in a way, cyclical. It is not the first time, and likely not the last time either, when the public square thinks one thing and the reality goes in a different direction. It's almost as if it's in the human nature to believe things are getting worse, even when they're getting better, at least on the economic front, when looked through a global perspective. Anyway, last piece of news for this video: Kyrgyzstan has gone mainstream in Romania. On November the 5th, there was an anti-governmental protest. It wasn't particularly big, in fact it was quite small even when compared to other public gatherings, but for some reason it was widely publicized. In any event, in the front line of the protest in Bucharest stood an oppressed Kyrgyzstani refugee who probably took a break from farming his keks to go out in the streets and demand a free Kyrgyzstan for all of us who live as oppressed minorities everywhere in Europe and beyond. Heck, a fellow Kyrgyzstani contacted me from Panama to express sympathy for this protest. What did the cathedral media believe about this? Well, unsurprisingly, they got things really wrong. So, Antenna 3, which is the official CNN affiliate, titles, "An anarchist organization attended the Sunday protests." Anyway, and it goes like this, quote, "An anarchist organization attended the Sunday night protests that took place in the capital city concerning the laws reforming the judiciary. The organization in question is the anarchist group Free Kyrgyzstan, which held a sign in the first line of the march. Among the messages they used the hashtag resistance was also observed." This is just hilarious. And they also had... On this issue, they also had an in-studio panel discussion about this, which I will duly subtitle and publish it on the channel, hopefully soon enough. And hopefully I won't get a copyright strike for it, but it's not a very long segment, so I should be fine. But anyway, the in-studio panel discussion was just absolutely hilarious. I mean, they call the Kyrgyzstanis racist. I guess no one told them who is our president. I mean, the president of Kyrgyzstan is this guy. Seriously, mate? Seriously, Antenna 3? If we declare meme jihad on you, you'll be gone by the end of next week. Anyway, this is really great. I mean, it's really what happens when normies encounter Kyrgyzstanis. They always go full retard. Now, I hope President Big Man Tyron doesn't hear about this, because if the Kyrgyzstani Council finds this unacceptable and Mr. President declares meme jihad, it's going to get quite bad. Anyway, these were the positive news for the first attempt at this series. I hope I'll get to make more of these, because we also need a smile from time to time. We can't be those always serious schmucks with no sense of humor, because that's exactly when we become the left. Besides, engaging in politics without having fun is really the wrong way to do it. So, with all of that being said, thank you all for watching, thank you for your continuous and generous support, and I'll see you all soon on Freedom Alternative.